Subcommander Rail had delivered bad news before. He had told generals about lost ships, about broken supply lines, about treaties that fell apart in the middle of signing ceremonies. He was good at it. He kept his voice flat. He kept his hands still. He looked the person in the eye and said the thing that needed to be said. He stood in front of Overmind Leth now, and felt for the first time in his career that his voice might not cooperate. The humans have withdrawn from the accord, he said. Leth did not look up from the star map on his desk. Species do that. Yes, sir. They come back. Yes, sir. Usually. Leth looked up. Usually. Rail set the data pad on the desk. They are mobilizing, sir. Mobilizing what? The kind of pause a man takes when he has checked his numbers 3 times and does not like them any better the third time. Everything, Rail said. The vote in UEC Parliament was not close. Ambassador Nara stood at the podium and did not raise her voice once. She read the Varric Treaty clause aloud, the one that let them take 3 human colony worlds under a reinterpretation that no human representative had ever agreed to. She read it slowly. She read every word. Then she put that paper down and picked up another one. She read the casualty report from Hale, then the one from Boren, then the partial report from CL4, which was partial because the Varric had shut down all communications coming out of the station before the count was finished. She sat down. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when people have already made up their minds and are just waiting for permission to act on it. The vote was unanimous. Admiral Dane got the news in her office on the 14th floor of UEC Command. She was drinking cold coffee and reading the same censor report she had read 4 times already. The aide who came in was young and still had the look of someone who expected the world to be reasonable. He handed her the parliamentary authorization and stood up straight like he was expecting a speech. She signed it. She handed it back. Get me Junho, she said. She turned back to the censor report. She finished her cold coffee. She pulled the navigation chart of Varric core systems out of the drawer where she had been keeping it for 6 weeks and pinned it to the wall. She took everything else off the wall. First, just the chart, nothing else. She stood in front of it for a long time, with her arms crossed and her eyes moving the way eyes move when a person is not looking at what's in front of them but at something 3 steps past it. Colonel Junho arrived 11 minutes later. He looked at the chart on the wall. He looked at her. He had worked with Dane for 9 years. He had learned not to ask how she was feeling because the answer was always the same. She was working. We have authorization, she said. I heard. I need the full recall order drafted. Every ship on a core peacekeeping rotation comes home. Junho already had his notepad out. Timeline, she talked. The 2 of them had a language that was mostly shorthand and silence, and they moved through the morning in it like they had been planning this specific conversation for months, because they had. Corporal Teju got his deployment orders at 600. He read them once. He folded the paper in half and put it in his chest pocket. He sat on the edge of his bunk for a while looking at the floor, and then he got up and made his bed with the kind of care that had nothing to do with the bed. He called his mother at 700. She answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. He told her he was being deployed. He did not tell her where. She did not ask. There was a silence on the line that was full of everything they were not saying. And then she told him to eat before he got on the transport, and he said he would, and they both knew he wouldn't. And that was fine. That was how they talked. He stared at his phone. His brother had called from Hale's station 8 months ago, and that had been the last call. The line had gone quiet 2 days later. When the Varric took over, Tiho cleaned his rifle, start to finish every piece. Dr. Yari received her Project Molar briefing in a basement room with no windows and too many uniformed people for the size of the space. A general she had never met explained what they needed her to build. He used careful language, measured language, the kind of language people use when they are describing something enormous and trying to make it sound manageable. She started laughing halfway through. Not a nervous laugh, not a this is absurd laugh, the laugh of a person who has been thinking about a problem for years in the privacy of their own head and has just been told that someone else wants the answer. Nobody in the room laughed with her. The general stopped talking and waited. Sorry, she was not sorry. Keep going. The fleet formed up 3 days later at a space coordinate that did not appear on any of Cord navigation chart. Ship after ship dropping out of faster than light travel and falling into formation like they had always known where to stand. Dane watched from the bridge of the command carrier and did not let herself feel anything about how many ships there were, because feeling things about it was not useful. Junho stood next to her. He was on his third cup of coffee and looked like a man who had decided that sleep was a philosophy he no longer subscribed to. Long-range ping, the sensor officer said. Varric origin, they found us. Dane said nothing. Junho said nothing. Far across the fleet corridor in a room on the Varric command station, Commander Rail looked at his sensor data and ran the numbers again. Then he picked up the communication line to Overmind Lef. General, he said. His voice was very flat, very careful. The voice of a man holding something fragile. It's the humans. A pause. And they are not pleased. Overmind Lef had a room full of strategists and none of them could explain it cleanly. He had asked a simple question. He asked them to describe human military doctrine, what they fight for, how they fight when they stop. The first strategist talked for 4 minutes and kept using the phrase irregular pattern. Lef had no patience for irregular patterns. Patterns were the whole point of strategy. The second strategist showed charts. The charts had too many lines going in directions that should have canceled each other out but didn't. The third strategist said carefully that human military history was extensive. How extensive? Leth said. They have been fighting wars on their own planet for approximately 12,000 years, the strategist said. They have not stopped. All species fight wars. Yes, sir. Most species fight wars until they win, or until the cost becomes too large. A pause. Humans have a different relationship with cost. Leth looked at the sensor data again. The fleet formation on the screen was too organized for a species that was supposed to be junior members of a diplomatic body. It had the shape of something that had been rehearsed. How long have they been planning this? He said. Nobody answered. He already knew. Long enough, the fleet crossed into neutral space on a Tuesday. Dane did not mark the crossing. There was no ceremony, no announcement. Shipwide. One moment they were in UEC territory. The next they weren't. The stars looked the same. Space had no opinion about the line they had just crossed. Jun-ho was running projection models on his secondary screen. He had been running them since 400. The coffee cup next to him had been refilled so many times it had given up having a temperature. Walk me through the third model, Dane said. Varric win the first 3 engagements by numbers alone. Their fleet is larger, their formation discipline is good, and they know this corridor better than we do. He scrolled. Fourth engagement is different. How different? It requires doing something that has never been done in recorded space. Combat. She looked at him. Does it work? In the model. Is the model honest? He considered this with the expression of a man who took the question seriously. I built it to be. The fourth engagement scenario was a mess of overlapping vectors and counter rotations that looked on screen like someone had drawn a fight and then changed their mind halfway through. Approve it, she said. You're certain? I'm committed, she said. That's not the same thing, and you know it. He did know it. He approved the model. Min-ho briefed his fighter wing standing on the wing of his own ship with a notepad and a black marker, the way his instructor had done it 20 years ago at the training base on Jeju Station. Some of his pilots were half his age. They looked at the notepad like it might be a joke. It was not a joke. Min-ho's fighter wing had the best survival rate in the fleet. Nobody made jokes about the notepad. He drew the patrol corridor. He marked the 3 blind spots in Varric long-range sensor coverage that his recon runs had found. He explained what he needed and what he did not need and what would get people killed. His left eye socket was smooth and empty, no patch, no prosthetic. He had lost the eye at Kepler Station 7 months ago, and he wore the empty socket the way some people wear a scar, not for show, just as a fact. He capped the marker. Questions, he said. One of the younger pilots raised her hand. Are we expecting contact? We're expecting whatever's coming, Min-ho said, which is a better way to think about it. She put her hand down. She thought about that for a moment and found it was actually reassuring. TiVo's transport was crowded and smelled like recycled air and boot polish, and the particular anxiety of 200 people sitting with their own thoughts for 20 hours. He played cards with 3 soldiers from the unit next to his. He lost twice and won once. The winning hand was not exciting. He wasn't thinking about the cards. The man across from him, Sergeant Bale, big hands, spoke too loud, made everyone laugh at mess, kept the game moving. He had a gift for filling silence. Taejo was grateful for it, the way you're grateful for something you don't say out loud. He thought about Hale. He thought about his brother's last message, which had been short and had ended mid-sentence because the line had cut out. He had replayed it. He had stopped replaying it because replaying it did not change the ending. He won another hand. He didn't notice. Dr. Yari ran the first prototype test of Project Molar at a decommissioned Rain in deep space at a safe distance that she had calculated herself and then doubled. The test lasted 4 seconds. It removed a section of uninhabited moon roughly the size of a mid-sized city. She stared at the result data for a long time. In the summary field she typed viable and underlined it. Then she underlined it again. Then she underlined it a third time and sat back and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a person who has been given a very large answer to a very large question and is now thinking carefully about what questions come next. She submitted the report. She started on the second prototype before anyone had read the first. The Varric ultimatum came through on the fleet's main channel. Every ship received it at the same time. The message was long and formal and used the kind of official language that was designed to make the person reading it feel small. The core of it was simple: stand down or be classified as an aggressor state. The Dominion would respond with full military authority. The Galactic Accord would not intervene. On humanity's behalf, the humans were alone in this, and they should understand what that meant. Dane read it on a printed copy because she read everything important on paper. She folded it in half. She handed it to Juno. He opened his desk drawer, the one on the left, the deep one, and dropped it in and closed the drawer. No response was sent to the Varric. The fleet kept moving, formation tight, heading steady, stars sliding past the forward windows the way stars do. Indifferent, ancient, keeping no score. In the quiet of the bridge, the only sound was the engine hum and Juno refilling his coffee and the soft, constant data feed from sensors watching the dark ahead. They were coming, and they were not coming to negotiate. Rael presented the Dorvin corridor plan with both hands on the table and his voice very steady. The corridor was a long, narrow channel between two dense asteroid fields, kind of space that forced ships into single file movement that stripped away the advantage of a wide formation that turned the large fleet into a long line. The Varric had used it before, 3 times, 3 different species, 3 clean victories. The corridor did the work for them. It split whatever came into it, and then they destroyed the halves separately. Leth studied the projection. They'll enter the corridor. They have no other path to our staging position. They will enter, Rael agreed. The ambush holds on both sides. Yes, sir. Then it's finished. Leth leaned back. He had the comfortable look of a man who had done a calculation and found the answer satisfied. They are large, but they are not clever. Rahul looked at the projection. He looked at it a moment longer than he needed to. No, sir, he said. Of course not. Dane had read every recorded Varric engagement, all of them going back 60 years. She had read them the way you read a person's letters, not for the events, but for the habits underneath. The pauses, the patterns, the small choices that weren't choices at all anymore because they had been made so many times they were automatic. The Varric set traps the same way every time. She had known about the Dorvin corridor ambush before the fleet was 2 days out from it. She had known where they would position the forward element, where the secondary force would hold, and at what point they would trigger the split. She knew it the way you know how a familiar door swings before you touch the handle. She sent Menu, not the vanguard, not the forward formation, Menu's fighter wing, running fast and close to the asteroid fields. Inner edge, where the Varric sensors had a 17-second delay due to interference. 17 seconds was a long time. Minyu knew what to do with 17 seconds. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Later, people would write about the Dorvan corridor engagement as a tactical masterpiece, the feint formation, the counter-rotation, the way the human fighters moved through the asteroid field like they had grown up inside it. They would write about the precision and the nerve and the way the Varak ambush force collapsed inward instead of outward when the pressure came from the wrong direction. Minyu filed his post-action report 6 hours after landing. He wrote 7 names first: Pilot Sora, Pilot Dayan, Pilot Yui, Pilot Chain, Pilot Bomb, Pilot Rio, Pilot Wall. He wrote their names at the top of the report, above the tactical summary, above the damage assessment, above the enemy casualty count. 7 names, nothing else on that first page. Then he turned to the second page and read the rest of it. While Minyu's wing was drawing the Varak's attention at the corridor entrance, the main fleet hit the secondary staging position. Junho's model, the one that required something that had never been tried. The staging position was lightly defended. It was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be threatened. The Varak had pulled their best ships to the corridor ambush. What remained was maintenance crews, logistic ships, and a defensive perimeter designed to stop a small raid. It was not a small raid. The engagement was over in 51 minutes. The staging position fell. The supply chain to the Varak forward fleet was cut, without resupply, without support. The ambush force at the Dorvan corridor had 2 options: fall back or fight on empty. They fell back. Leth ordered the retreat himself. Rail watched the order go out on the communication feed and thought about the 3 species before humanity, the ones who had entered the corridor and split apart cleanly. He thought about the look on Leth's face when the staging position fell. Not rage, something quieter than rage. The look of a person whose model of the world had developed a crack. Tavo's unit made landfall uncontested. Moon 7 at 300 hours. The briefing had described it as a secondary objective of Varak communications relay station on a moon with low gravity and minimal defensive presence. The briefing had used words like clean and contained. The moon was not clean. The relay station was defended by more than the scan had shown. Either the Varak had moved assets in the last 12 hours or the scan had been wrong. Either way, it didn't matter because the bullets were real. The gravity plate in Sector 7 was broken. Every third step in that section, Tivo's boots felt too light, like the ground was trying to return him to the sky. He hated it. He adapted to it in 4 minutes because there was no other option. The medic specialist aura was gone in the first 20 minutes. Wrong place when a support strut came down. Teho did not stop moving. He filed it somewhere deep and kept his eyes on the next piece of cover and the one after that. He would open that file later, not now. They took the relay station in 90 minutes, 48 minutes longer than projected. Baal sat down against a wall outside the main relay hub and let out a long, slow breath. Well, he said, that was contained. Teho looked at him. The briefing said contained. Baal said, I'm just noting. Teho sat down next to him. Not because he needed to rest, because Baal needed someone to sit next to him. And Teho was there. They sat. The Galactic Accord reached out to the UAC fleet the next morning. The transmission was routed through 3 intermediary channels before it reached Dane's bridge, which was the Accord's way of saying they were being careful, which was the Accord's way of saying they were worried. The representative on screen was polished and even-toned and used the word dialogue 4 times in the first 30 seconds. Dane let him finish. "One question," she said. The representative waited. "Are the 3 colony worlds on the table?" The representative paused, the kind that meant the answer was no, but the speaker had not yet decided how to dress it. She ended the call. She looked at Junho. He already had the next target. Coordinates on screen. He had pulled them up before the call was over. She nodded. He locked in the heading. The fleet moved. Rail's hands were not still anymore. He had spent his whole career keeping his hands still during reports. It was a discipline, a professional thing, the kind of control that told the person across the table that the news, whatever it was manageable, that the man delivering it had a handle on reality and was simply sharing it. He was standing in front of Leth now, with his data pad and his list of numbers, and his hands were doing a thing he could not stop them from doing. 2 Dominion species have stopped answering fleet mobilization requests, he said. Leth said nothing. The Saural have cited internal disputes. The Mareth have gone quiet entirely. He looked at his pad. Our fuel resupply chain is operating at 61% following the loss of the staging position. The forward fleet is he stopped. The forward fleet is tired, sir. Then he said, are they tired or are they afraid? Rail thought about it honestly. Both. Leth stood up. He moved to the star map. He studied it with his hands behind his back, and when he turned around he had the look of a man who had found a path through the numbers, the look of someone who had found the one move that made everything else irrelevant. Full convergence, he said. Every ship open space, we meet them in the open where nothing gives them an edge, and we end it with numbers. Riel looked at the map. The full Dominion fleet, every ship they had converged into a single, overwhelming force in open space. It had worked before. 6 times against 6 different species. None of them had survived it. Yes, sir, Riel said. His hands were still doing the thing. Minu's recon run came back at 5:40. He came in fast and landed hard, and walked directly to the bridge without going to the debrief room, because the bridge was where Dane was and the bridge was where this needed to go. He handed the data chip to the sensor officer without a word. The sensor officer plugged it in. The display filled. The full Dominion fleet sat in open space 2 light hours out, assembled. The tightest formation anyone in that room had ever seen. It was enormous. The word enormous wasn't quite large enough. It was the kind of thing that made the human fleet, which was itself not small, look like something that belonged to a different conversation. The bridge was quiet. Minu stood with his arms crossed and his empty eye socket pointed at the screen. He added one line to the sensor report he had handed over. You seeing this, Admiral? Dane looked at the screen for a long time. Yes, she said. Tell Dr. Yuri she's clear. Dr. Yuri had been waiting in the lower bay for 4 hours. She had 2 technicians with her and the second Project Molar unit, the full-scale version, not the prototype. It was not a large device. That was the thing people did not understand when they saw it for the first time. They expected something enormous. What they got was something the size of a cargo container, unremarkable and gray, sitting on a deployment rail. The Verydic had spent decades allowing other species to attend technical summits as observers. It was a courtesy, a small diplomatic gesture, a way of saying you are welcome here, while meaning you will never catch up. Humanity had attended every single one. They had taken notes, they had asked polite questions, they had listened to explanations of Verydic drive, architecture with the patient attention of students who had no intention of staying students. Project Molar was built specifically for that drive architecture. It did not destroy ships, it spoke to them in their own language at a frequency their systems could not ignore, and it told them to stop every ship at once. Dr. Yuri checked the alignment one final time. She looked at her technicians. They looked back. Deploy, she said. The Dominion fleet stopped. Not damaged, not on fire, not retreating, stopped. Every ship in the formation, 641 vessels, sat dead in space like furniture. On the Verydic command station, every alarm in the building went off at the same time. Rahl stared at his console. He had a console full of data and none of it explained what he was looking at. Systems nominal, hull integrity intact. Engines simply not responding, not broken, not overridden, not responding. As though they had decided on their own. That movement was no longer a thing they were going to do. He looked at Leth. Leth was already looking at him. Rahul opened his mouth. He had nothing. Dane opened the direct channel to overmind Leth herself. The conversation was not recorded in the official UAC history. What went into the record was the outcome. The Dominion fleet held position. No weapons were fired. The channel closed. After 9 minutes, Junho, standing 2 FT away, heard every word of it. He never repeated any of it to anyone. Not because he was ordered not to. Because some things are just between the person who has the leverage and the person who doesn't, and putting them on record changes what they were. What he would say years later when asked about those 9 minutes was this. She wasn't cruel, she was clear. There's a difference. Teho's unit made landfall on Hale at dawn. The planet was green. That surprised him. He had been thinking about it for months. As something abstract and administrative. A word in a report, a coordinate on a map. It was green. The sky was the particular shade of pale blue that early mornings have when the sun is still low and the air is cold. The Varric administrative facility was in the colony's central district. It was an orderly building, clean. The Varric were thorough occupiers. They had kept the infrastructure running. The power was on. The people were accounted for in the way that things in boxes are accounted for. Teho's unit cleared the building in 40 minutes. In the processing facility on the east side of the colony, in a room with a long window that looked out on the green hills, his brother Hanu was sitting at a work table when the door opened. He looked up. Teho stood in the doorway in full gear, rifle across his chest, face behind a visor. He pulled the visor up. Hanu stared. Teho said nothing. Hanu's chair scraped back. He stood up. too fast and grabbed the table to steady himself. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from something larger than fear, something that didn't have a clean name, something that lives in the chest, between relief and disbelief, and the specific exhaustion of a person who has been waiting for 8 months and cannot quite believe the waiting is over. Tejo crossed the room. They didn't say anything. Not yet. There was nothing that needed to be said first. Ambassador Nara's transmission to the Galactic Accord was sent at 1400 that same day. It was not a request for mediation. It was not an appeal to the Accord's judgment. It was terms. She had written it herself at her desk, on paper with a pen, because some documents should be made by hand. She read it to the Accord representatives on screen and watched their faces the whole time, the way their expressions moved through careful diplomacy and out the other side, into something more honest. They looked at her differently than they had during the Ember speech. 6 weeks ago she had been the ambassador of a junior member species, reading casualty lists in a flat voice. She was still reading in a flat voice, but the thing she was reading had changed. She finished. The screen was quiet. "We will review the terms," the lead representative said. "You'll find them reasonable," Nara said, given the alternative. She closed the channel. She sat in her chair for a moment. She looked at her hands. She looked at the window. Then she picked up her pen and started writing the follow-up document, because there was always a follow-up document, and the work did not stop just because the hard part was done. The hard part is never the last part. Rail delivered his final report standing up. He had always delivered reports standing up. It was protocol. Today it felt different, like standing was the only dignified thing left to do after everything else had been taken off the table. He read the terms. He read them clearly, without pause, without softening any of the language. The 3 colony worlds, Hal Boran, Co. 4, returned to UEC control effective immediately. Reparations paid in full within 60 standard days. A formal acknowledgement signed and entered into Galactic Accord record that the treaty reinterpretation had been unlawful. 2 Dominion species, the Sorrel and the Murith, had already filed preliminary requests for UEC diplomatic relations. He set the data pad down. Leth had not moved in several minutes. He was looking at the star map the way person looks at a thing they built and watched fall. "How did we miss them?" he said, but Rail had thought about it. He had been thinking about it since the Dorvin corridor, since the staging position, since Molar. He had been turning the question over in his mind like a stone he kept hoping would look different from a new angle. It never did. He answered Leth in one sentence, a short one, simple words. Leth looked at him for a long time after that. He said nothing. He turned back to the map. Rail picked up his data pad and left the room, and he did not look back, because some rooms you only need to leave once. The fleet came home on a Thursday. No ceremony in deep space. Ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel and falling into the approach corridor toward Earth one by one. The way soldiers come home. Not all at once, not with drama, just slowly filling in until the space that was empty is not empty anymore. Dane stood on the bridge of the command carrier and watched the planet come up. On the forward display, blue and white and green, the same as it had always been the same as it would be after all of them were gone. She had been awake for 21 hours. She did not feel it yet. She would feel it later when there was nothing left to hold the tiredness back. Juno stood next to her with an empty coffee cup. He had stopped refilling it sometime in the last few hours and was just holding it, which was either a sign that he was finally resting or a sign that he had forgotten he was holding it. Dane did not ask which. Resignation, he said. No, I haven't said anything yet. You were going to. He looked at the cup. He thought about it. I want to go home for 2 weeks. Approved, she said. Come back. He put the cup down on the console. You're going to need someone to tell you when the plans are bad. I know. Because you don't always. I know, Juno. He nodded, looked at the planet. Okay. They watched it come closer in silence. And it was a comfortable silence, the kind that means two people have been in the same hard place for long enough that they don't have to explain it to each other. The memorial at the spaceport was built fast, a stone wall with names cut into it, standing in the open air near the main terminal where families arrived. It seemed right to put it there, in the place where waiting happened. Minu stood in front of it on the day of the dedication. There was a crowd, there were officials. Someone had written a speech about sacrifice and service and the price of freedom and all the correct words that correct speeches contain. Minu listened with his hands in his pockets and his face arranged into something neutral. When it was his turn, he walked to the podium. He looked at the wall. He read 7 names. Sara Dayan Bowie Chen Bom Ryo Wall. He stepped back. He did not add anything. The crowd was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than crowds usually allow silence to stretch. And then someone started to applaud and the rest followed, but Minu was already stepping down from the podium and he was not listening to the applause. He was looking at the wall. 7 names were the thing, everything else was around the edges of the thing. He had flown with all of them. He had drunk bad coffee with all of them in the hours before missions and debriefed with all of them in the hours after and known all of them in the particular way that people who do dangerous things together know each other quickly and completely with very little room for pretending. He stood in front of the wall until the crowd started to leave. Then he stood there a little longer. Tiho and his brother Hanu sat on the steps of a temporary housing unit on Hale as the sun went down. The colony was under reconstruction. There were cranes on the horizon and the sound of machinery and the particular smell of freshly poured building material. That means a place is being put back together. The East Grid still had power problems. The rains were late this year, which was a problem for the farms on the lower plateau. The temporary housing had thin walls and the heaters were inconsistent. It was alive, that was the main thing. It was alive and making noise in it. Smelled like cooking and construction. And the particular smell of a place that is deciding to continue. They did not talk about the last 8 months. They talked about their mothers cooking, specifically her radish soup, which Hanu had been thinking about for so long it had taken on a mythological quality in his memory. He wasn't sure the actual soup could compete with what it had become in his head. Tiho said it would definitely compete. Hanu said that was easy for Tiho to say because Tiho had actually eaten it in the last 8 months. Tiho noticed his brother's hands on the Step between them still, not perfectly. Still a small tremor, the kind that comes from the body having held something tense for too long and not yet remembering how to let it go. He moved his hand and set it down next to his brother's hand on the step, not touching, just close. Some things you don't name. You just put yourself next to them and wait. The sun dropped below the green hills. The sky went orange and then purple and then dark somewhere in the colony. A generator clicked on and the lights came up in the windows around them, one by one. Dr. Yarrow was already working on the next thing. Nobody had officially asked her to. The war was over. The crisis was resolved. The situation was stable. There was a reasonable argument that she should take a rest. She was aware of this argument. She found it unconvincing. The lab was quiet. Her two technicians had gone home. The lights were on the low setting she preferred when she was thinking. She had a cold cup of tea and 3 data pads and a whiteboard covered in equations that were having an argument with each other. She laughed at something on the whiteboard, not because it was funny, because it was interesting, because the equation she was looking at had an answer she had not expected, and the unexpected answer opened a door into a room she had not known was there. And that room was full of questions, and she loved questions the way other people love certainty, not despite the fact that they had no answers yet, but because of it. Nobody in the lab laughed with her. That was fine. She was used to laughing alone. The Galactic Accord convened under the new framework 3 weeks later. Nara sat at the table that humanity had previously occupied as junior members. The small table at the edge of the room, where the seating assignments quietly told you what the Accord thought of you. She had the table replaced. The new table was in the center. Her chair was at the head of it. The other representatives filed in and found their seats. Several of them looked at the new table, and then at Nara, and then at the new table again. She let them look. The new framework was read into the record, the one written largely in her handwriting, the one that gave humanity permanent veto authority, the one that rebuilt the terms of what the Accord was and who it served. It was a long document. She had written every line of it herself, and she knew every line of it. And when the reading reached the part about equal standing, she did not smile, because smiling was not what the moment needed. The moment needed her to be still and let the words sit. So she was still. Applications for Earth Alliance status had arrived from 6 species who had watched the war from the sidelines. She read every one personally. She approved 4. She tabled 2 for further review. She declined none because Dane had taught her something in those 6 weeks, that you never close a door you might need to walk through later, and you never burn a bridge you might need to cross in the other direction. The session closed at 1700 in a small office on the far edge of a Veridian intelligence facility. A young analyst filed his first long-range surveillance report on humanity. He was thorough. He did the numbers carefully. He wrote clean, accurate descriptions of fleet strength and technological capability and diplomatic reach. He filled in every field. He reached the species threat classification section. He looked at the drop-down menu. He went through every option. He went through it twice. None of them fit. Not the categories for aggressive, expansion species, not the categories. For defensive deterrent species, not the categories for unpredictable or unstable species. None of the frameworks were the right shape. He sat back in his chair. He stared at the screen for a while. He thought about what Rail had said too. Overmind Leth in that final report. The single sentence that had made Leth go quiet in a way that nothing in the war had. He had not heard the sentence directly, but word traveled, even in intelligence facilities, especially in intelligence facilities. He thought about it. He thought about the fleet that would not stop, the tactic that had never been tried, the weapon that knew their ships better than their own engineers did, the admiral who read ultimatums and put them in a drawer, the soldiers who went to a moon in broken gravity and came back with the job done. He created a new classification field. He typed in the label carefully. He saved the report. He turned off his screen. He sat in the dark for a moment, alone, with the particular feeling of a person who has just understood something that cannot be ununderstood. Then he went home. Outside, the stars held their positions, the way they always had, ancient, patient, keeping no score, watching everything.